Today's episode is brought to you by Scientist.com, the life science industry's leading R&D orchestration platform. Scientist.com gives researchers instant access to thousands of pre-vetted suppliers, saving time, reducing costs, and accelerating innovation.
Hi, I'm John Gagliano, Senior Director of BioPharmCatalyst.
Hello, I'm Sheff, known as Sheff Station, a 20-year vet in trading biotech stocks.
And this is Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. BioPharmCatalyst is not a registered investment advisory firm, and the views on this podcast are not intended to be financial advice. Guests on this podcast may hold the stocks discussed in personal or other investment accounts. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when and where you're joining us from. Welcome once again to another episode of Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Today is Tuesday, June 23rd, 2026. And as always, we are excited to have Sheff back on for another episode of the podcast and to talk through some of what's been going on in the market with some of the trades that he's talked about recently, and then also his upcoming watch list. So welcome back, Sheff.
Thank you. It's great to be here. There's a lot of hot activity going on right now with the XBI and the IBB, and biotech is it's looking really good. Some are calling it frothy, but I'd rather that than the other way.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. Before we jump in, I did want to make everyone on the call aware. So one of the things that we had gotten heavy requests for as a platform was access to our API. So traditionally, we had an API that was intended for institutional use. So what we did was we actually packaged a more basic version of our API as part of our Elite Plus yearly package. So for folks who are interested in getting the data direct via our API, we do have that up and live via our Elite Plus yearly package. As I mentioned, it's only part of the yearly. It's not part of the monthly, but we do have the documentation on our site. So if you're interested in checking it out, please check it out. You can see on the share screen, Christian is walking us through where to find that documentation and where to find the API access. So just wanted to make everyone aware of that. And we're really excited that product is live. So, but yeah, Sheff, let's jump into the conversation. So I think one of the things that has come up several times, but it seems to sort of be the gift that keeps on, I guess the gift that keeps on giving to some degree is this idea of the one pivotal trial. And I think it's sort of not to over, to sort of, to continue on and keep on talking about it. But I think that, because of how impactful it's been, it's worth reiterating, the instances of which this is severely impacting the current marketplace. So we see it with OTLK, ALDX. So I don't know. Do you want to talk just a little bit about how this is continuing to change the landscape as we know it within the biotech space?
It is. It's changing the landscape because it's allowing for discussion with the FDA. And, and it's not just, obviously Outlook Therapeutics really changed that, being the first one to, use a federal dispute resolution and have that appeal granted. And obviously they've got a PDUFA date now of July 29th that I'll talk about later. But look at what just happened a few days ago where, we're seeing this policy shift. The wind is at the FDA has shifted, and it's shown with Cure, Unicure, which announced earlier yesterday that the FDA is open to accepting their BLA, based on their 3-year data that they have in HD. And So, analysts like RBC are saying that they caught up with the management team, and the management team is just really excited because it's clear to them that with Vinay Prasad and Martin Macri no longer available at the FDA, that the vibe in the room at the FDA has shifted to a much more permissive tone. Um, on that note, it's notable, that the FDA is not only willing to review the BLA of Unicure, but they're also willing to do so without waiting for the 4-year data within weeks. And as if and without a confirmatory trial that's a sham or placebo-controlled trial. So they're just much more open to reviewing applications, and obviously, Outlook Therapeutics, set the stage for that. So I just wanted to reiterate that I think it's going to be more so that the FDA is going to be open to not just discussing this one pivotal trial, but the totality of data. So say that you don't have a one confirmatory trial, the FDA is still willing to meet with you to say, okay, if we're in a if we're in a situation where we're at a orphan drug disease and you've hit your secondary endpoint and might not hit your primary endpoint, there's still a place for your drug. It's not just an absolute no. And so it's that flexibility that we're seeing with the FDA because of this one pivotal trial that is that's opening up discussion with other biotechs. And a lot of those biotechs are on their deathbed, and they're waiting for they were waited for a situation like this to occur where the FDA would be willing to open up dialogue without them having to go through another phase 3 clinical trial to demonstrate, superiority in their primary and secondary. But a lot of times they didn't have the cash. And so a lot of those companies,
Yeah.
like Outlook, didn't have a second chance. So we're seeing that now. So it's not really beating a dead horse with that one pivotal trial, because
Yeah.
we're seeing that one pivotal trial dogma extended to the totality of data, which moves away from one pivotal trial and into we'll look at clinical data in general. And I'll talk about that because that's happening with Gossamer Bio. It's happening with MREO Pharma, where they don't have proven clinical trials of statistical significance and efficacy and safety. So they don't meet that one pivotal trial, but the FDA is still willing to discuss the totality of their data with them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's definitely worth continuing to reiterate as it continues to have the impact that it's been having. So, I know you mentioned, XBI, IBB, markets are pretty frothy right now. I guess it depends on if you want to look at it glass half full or half empty. For us, we probably prefer glass half full, and I think that we're in a really good place. So, yeah, let's jump into it. Why don't we talk about some of the catalysts that you have on your watch list, Sheff?
Absolutely. And just to follow up to what you were saying in terms of the IBB and XBI, historically, we don't see the levels that we're seeing typically now after we've gone through, big time meetings, associated with, oncology and other disease states. Obviously, AACR is big in April.
Yeah.
We just finished with ASCO. A lot of times there's a big letdown during the summer months as we move into the fall months. But we're not seeing that right now. And I think, there's many different reasons because of that, but it's really impressive to what we've seen over the past, 2 to 3 weeks on the continuing build up to this XBI and IBB setting record highs amidst, not really having, buyouts and mergers and, headline news in biotech that we typically would have to drive this type of success that we're seeing with IBB and XBI. But
if you find the information that Sheff is presenting on this podcast useful and would like to gain more insights into his trading strategy for individual tickers, you can donate to this charity, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes, and all individuals donating $300 or more get full access to his VIP private X account. Founded in 2007, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes is a national leader dedicated to improving the quality of life for children, youth and adults through participation in sports and physical activity in communities across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. NWABA's programs focus on helping people who are blind build confidence, gain self-esteem, develop friendships, and reach their greatest potential. You can donate by clicking on the link at the bottom of our podcast page, www.biopharmcatalyst.com/podcast, or via the link in the YouTube video description.
Moving forward, getting to that list as you talked about, we're coming up on some key catalysts, and I want to talk about first off, the catalysts that I own, and then I'll talk about the ones that are on watch list that are strongly being looked at as well and are very interesting. So let's start with one that we've been talking about since the beginning of the year, Unicisive. And, Unicisive has their PDUFA date coming up on June 29th. And, that's crucial because obviously when they had their CRL last year was based on a manufacturing issue. And, the company has reassured investors that has been addressed. Obviously, they announced when they had their earnings that they were in label discussions, which obviously that does not happen with the FDA unless manufacturing has been taken care of. And there's also the company that they work with. That's the manufacturer called Shipla had their fourth quarter earnings conference call on May 22nd. And if you recall, Shipla is Unicisive's contract development and manufacturing organization responsible for the manufacturing of OLC. And they specifically stated on that earnings call that they had a dedicated manufacturing production site for OLC, their drug, successfully the commission last quarter with validation batches that were to be completed this quarter. And the reason that's important is because what they also did, Unicisive, when they increased their ATM to get cash from 100 million to 150 million, is that Shipla dedicated an additional manufacturing site because they believe that the demand is going to be significant once the drug is approved. They haven't done that with Unicisive in the past, but obviously they are comfortable with the manufacturing issues that have been addressed by the FDA, and obviously labeling discussion. So now it's just a matter of, we saw it over the past few days break $8 a share after it was in the 670 to 680 range. And so we'll see what happens into the PDUFA date. We could see continued growth in terms of stock price appreciation into that date, or maybe we see it, kind of settle in the $8.59 range until we hear about a PDUFA. But either way, I think the company is set up. They've got plenty of cash, and the CEO again remains confident that the company is on track to be approved next week. So that is Unicisive. I've had that stock. I like it. And I also think as a trader, there's several different ways you can play it. You could, take some off the top and play some into approval, because I think when they get approved, it's going to make a strong move, or you can hold it. It just depends on what you're going to do. I mean, I think obviously if you've had some appreciation on the stock, you've been waiting in it a while, it's a good idea always to take some profits along the way. That's just how I choose to deal with a lot of these plays. Let's move forward on Outlook Therapeutics. That's one that we've had, since we started talking about it in February, March. Obviously, we know that at that time it was 20 cents. And right now, I believe it closed at like $1.70. So it's up well over, 600-700%. I'd say it's probably closer to 800% if you look at what it's done. Obviously, on June 16th, they announced FDA acceptance of their resubmitted biologics license application. They set a PDUFA date of July 29th. And, it's clear that, they expect that their ONS 5010, which is Lentinava for the treatment of neovascular age-related macular degeneration, is going to get approved. Such that in their press release, they stated when approved, their drug, ONS 5010 Lentinava, will be the first and only FDA-approved ophthalmic formulation of bevacizumab, supported by standardized manufacturing, FDA-approved labeling, and robust pharmacovigilance. Uh, they're pretty confident. When you say when we get approved, obviously this is the fourth time around. So, most of the times, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, most of the times these companies don't come out and say that unless they're confident of approval.
I would agree with that. I mean, and four times is, a lot of times after two or three, I mean, there's, you're kind of in an expectation of approval. So I would think I would be pretty surprised as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, before I move forward on to the next stock that is similar to Outlook, they've had 3 rejections. So this is their 4th time. 2 of those were with regards to efficacy trials. One of them was with regards to manufacturing. So you could see that over the years, the FDA has been all over the board on Outlook. They have had an analyst come out recently and give them a price target of $8 a share, because they talked about how well the European launch is going. They just launched in Austria and Netherlands and Ireland, which is planned later in 2026, and then Switzerland in 2027. So they have 18 million in cash to see them through their approval. That's that on the price target. And it's actually $6 a share. So Outlook, I own a lot of Outlook. I've bought, I've shed, I've bought more times, and I plan on holding the position I have through approval. I'm expecting it to get over $3 a share on approval, and do quite well for the remainder of the year. Now that leads me to ALDX. And so ALDX is Aldera Therapeutics. And, Aldera has been to the altar several times with the FDA as well. Matter of fact, 3 times. Not for manufacturing, but all for efficacy. And so if you look at Aldera, you'll see that they were a $5.50 stock in March, before they got a complete response letter. That was on March 17th. And, basically, the FDA was very vague in that complete response letter. They stated that there's a lack of substantial evidence consisting of adequate and well-controlled investigations that the drug product will have the effect it purports or is represented to have under the conditions of use prescribed, recommended, or suggested in its proposed labeling. The reason I mention that is because that's similar language that they used when they gave Outlook their complete response letter in December. And so there was just an Oppenheimer meeting that took place at the beginning of June. And the CEO of Aldera pretty much said, hey, we are going to be having, this meeting is timely, this Oppenheimer meeting, and, obviously June 1st, because we are days ahead of, or days away from having a type A meeting with the FDA. And what did he say? He said he doesn't believe that the type A meeting is going to go in their favor. It's going to pretty much be consistent with what the ophthalmic division of the FDA has done to Outlook and what they've done with Aldera, which is pretty much say that you don't have the evidence based on the 9 clinical studies that you've had. 5 of those studies have been safety and tolerability related. 4 have been efficacy related. 2 have shown statistical significance in terms of primary and secondary endpoint. Remember, Outlook had 1, and their appeal was accepted, was granted. So I believe, and the CEO specifically stated that this meeting with the FDA, he said in his words, it's about to get real. And the reason he said that is because he truly believed that the ophthalmic division is not really working in accordance with the new guideline, the new policy update by the FDA with regards to the 1 pivotal trial. So I looked up because I hadn't seen any notes from the FDA meeting, the Type A meeting that Aldera had, but I did look up, some AI notes in terms of, what it possibly could have taken place. And, what I found was that the Type A meeting has been held, and the FDA determined that Aldera can attempt to rescue the drug without running any new clinical trials, focusing instead on deeper data analysis. It says because the meeting took place in April of 2026, within the mandatory 30-day window following the March 17th CRL, um, the core determinations and regulatory parameters have been locked in. So basically, there's two things. No new trials required, which is a major win for the company's financial runway, because obviously to do a phase 3 trial is extremely expensive. The FDA explicitly did not request new clinical trials or demand additional confirmatory evidence. And the last thing is the exploration mandate. The FDA determined that Aldera must systematically explore the root causes behind its prior trial failures, which the CEO mentioned in the Oppenheimer investor meeting that in the CRL, the FDA basically, which is what's highlighted right there, the FDA basically said, we need you to explain why 4 of your trials were successful and 5 weren't. And instead of focusing on the 4 trials that were successful, you need to explain why the 5 trials that didn't meet statistical significance, why did they not meet that?
Mhm.
And so it was an interesting perspective that the CEO was unhappy about. But basically, the bottom line is the CEO stated that they're going to do a federal dispute resolution because they mentioned in the conference they're going to pursue the same route that Outlook pursued. And look at where the stock is. It's at $2 a share. And right now, obviously it was 550 back in March. So, there's a long way. There's a lot higher for that stock to go. Also, versus Outlook, compared to Outlook, they only have 60 million shares outstanding. They also have a lot of cash, and they have a partnership with AbbVie. So that partnership, obviously, there's an opt-in that's going to occur in August. And so if the FDA, if the ombudsman, when they file the federal dispute resolution, agrees and, accepts the appeal and allows them to file, they're going to be in the same situation as Outlook, which they expect to be because they have more clinical data
Mhm.
for what they're trying to get approved than Outlook did. And Outlook, got their PDUFA date for the 4th time. So I really like Aldera. I own the stock in the $1.70, $1.75 range. I bought some in the $2 range. I think it's going to go much higher. There's also additional confidence in that the CEO on June 3rd filed a Form 4, and he made a direct purchase of 250,000 shares at $1.68 a share. So he literally took $410,000 of his own money on the 3rd of June and said, "Hey, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is."
Yeah.
So I I mean, you don't see that in biotech and pharma, John, too much.
Right. Yeah.
So that is one that I really like a lot. So that's, UNCY talked about. Outlook, I own, and I own UNCY, and I also own Aldera because I think this approval coming up for Outlook is going to bode well for Aldera. So that's the third one. Let's look at QNRX. And QNRX right now, I mean, they had some data out today that the FDA conditionally accepted the name for their drug, and it traded almost to $5. It traded about 470, 480 today. It traded pretty high. And then right towards the end of the day, not sure why, but it peeled off. And
Yep.
it's a small float. They've got a lot of cash. They've got 2 million shares outstanding, and the stock just had a big drop today. But there is news on the way. And on 6/2, on June 2nd, they basically stated that they submitted an IND application for their QRX003 peeling skin syndrome. And so it's the first ever IND that was submitted for this disease, which has no treatment or cure. And they plan to initiate a study in the second half of 2026. So that's huge. Um, but, you had that, and so we should hear, with an IND, you always hear 30 days after submission. So the company should hear on July 2nd, where they stand, um, and if that was accepted so they can start their trial. The second thing that the company did a few days ago was they gave a positive clinical update regarding the ongoing pediatric Netherton syndrome compassionate use program. And basically, they talked about the fact that 4 out of 6 patients in the compassionate use program were classified as improved or significantly improved from baseline across key clinical endpoints. And they also plan to release in a couple months a comprehensive release of clinical data from this program, this ongoing phase 2 program, and these studies in the coming months. So that's pretty significant for a company that's this small. They have a lot of cash. It's definitely, they deal in the orphan drug disease space with Netherton syndrome, which there's no cure for, and then the peeling skin syndrome that also happens. So this downturn in the price, I'm gonna take a look later and see what's going on. Obviously, that just happened because again, it was trading in the high fours before. So there could have been a filing, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So we'll move on. So that's QNRX. I really like that one, and I have some shares of that one. I don't have a big position because it is so thinly traded, but you know. After I get off the call here, I'm going to definitely take a look and see if it's an opportunity to add because it's definitely a solid orphan drug disease company. Next one is Medicus Pharma, ticker symbol MDCX, and there's several stuff going on with Medicus. I like it because of the price. I also like it because on May 28th they just did a $22 million non-dilutive financing, and the financing increases their cash position about 30 million and provides a projected operating cash runway of more than 2 years. So for a company this small, that's significant. That basically takes them into 2028 with all the different catalysts they have ongoing. The first one is that on June 3rd, they filed an IND to advance SkinJect into registrational development for Gorlin syndrome. And, Gorlin syndrome is a rare disease. There's a significant unmet need. There's a lifetime burden of repeated skin cancer surgeries. So, they filed an IND for SkinJect. That IND should get approved around July 3rd because, again, it's 30 days out. Similar to what I just mentioned with QNRX with their peeling skin syndrome. So it takes 30 days for that IND to get approved. So that's the first catalyst there. The second catalyst is that they filed for orphan drug designation, and they filed for orphan drug designation on April 17th. And the FDA decides orphan drug designation within 60 to 90 days. So we're right in that, June 17th to July 17th window. And when you're dealing with a company with this kind of market cap, orphan drug designation news can oftentimes send it, flying, much higher because of the fact that the market cap is low and it's, you're targeting a rare, high burden genetic condition with no approved therapies, advances non-surgical treatment strategy for recurrent basal cell carcinoma, because when basal cell carcinomas continue to come back and back and back, you got to go in and have them surgically removed. With this, you don't. This is a, it's a dissolvable microneedle array that's designed for direct intradermal delivery into basal cell carcinoma lesions. So, the key attributes for that are localized drug delivery into the tissue, high local concentration with minimal systemic exposure, minimally invasive lesion-directed treatment, and then repeated use across multiple lesions over time. So, when you think about it, it's you're not going in for a surgical operation each time. And so the, market cap for the company is extremely low. Um, and so I think, yeah, I think that's great. It's a huge opportunity. It reminds me of where Outlook was at 20 cents and now it's $1.70. Medicus is going to be a mover with a lot of these catalysts ongoing. The other thing about Medicus is that they did an option to buy for 5 directors where they were giving out between 50,000 and 500,000 options to buy at 38 cents. So with the stock at 46 cents, it's it's not even 20% yet for the return. They're in the money because they have the right to buy the options at 38 cents, but it's
Yeah.
46 cents. So I think they expect that to go much higher.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good sign when they're doing it, especially when those options to buy were granted on June 3rd. So it was only a few weeks ago. So I like Medicus, and I think it provides a good opportunity for a rare disease company with a low market cap, a low float, and a lot of catalysts. They're going to help send it higher, and they have cash.
Yeah.
Let's look at the next one, NRXP. And I really like NRXP because I've talked with them. I talked about them in March and they were $1.80. It's $3.70 now. They've got a GDUFA date on the 27th of July, which is the Generic Drug User Free Act. Different than the PDUFA, but it's similar. And so, they're expanding the potential commercial opportunity. They're reinforcing the complementary dual path strategy alongside their Ketafree with an abbreviated. Ketafree did an abbreviated new drug application, or an ANDA. They're called ANDA. They got accepted by the FDA. The FDA already approved their commercial facility for creating batches of this ketamine product, and they have a GDUFA of July 29th. And it's really good for the company because it's their first entree into some of these psychedelic therapies that they're starting to use and treat for. So they've got Ketafree, which obviously that's July 29th. Then they've got NRX 100, which is it's currently in development. It's an IV ketamine for suicidal ideation therapy. And so, including bipolar and TRD for depression. And so, and that's got fast track, it's got national priority voucher applied. They've filed, 1 through 4 modules with the FDA already, and they anticipate they're going to complete their filing by June of 2026. So that could be a catalyst as well for NRXP, even before the GDUFA date on the 27th. So I really like that one. Keep in mind for NRXP because it's run a lot, but I still think it has a lot more to run. Let's look at the next one, which is Charlie, Nancy, Tom, Boy, CNTB. And I like this one because it's Connect Bio, and they basically just put out a press release that their enrollment is complete, and their Seabreeze asthma readout is now set for early September. So, that leads me to believe it's going to be in the first or second week at the latest of September, and it just gives traders that want to trade a catalyst an opportunity to buy into the fact that that data is expected to be positive by several analysts. H.C. Wainwright and others. There's a few others as well. But, three things. They're on track to complete their enrollment. Their Seabreeze stat um, uh, COPD study this month. They expect to report top-line data from Seabreeze stat asthma study in early September 2026. And then they also have a strong balance sheet with cash runway into the second half of 2027, which is a whole full year from now. So, H.C. Wainwright is giving them a $7 price target. Again, they've provided enrollment updates for REDEM and Big Park, their phase 2 Seabreeze stat proof of concept trials in acute exacerbations of asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. Importantly, the asthma proof of concept trial completed enrollment, which, that's what I'm talking about. That sets the stage for top line data in early September. And separately, Connect Biopharma remains on track to complete enrollment in their COPD proof of concept study this month. And then that enables top line data shortly after the asthma readout, somewhere around, October, early November. So, again, that one's in the $2 range. I own it. I owned it as soon as I saw that clear-cut catalyst, because I thought this is one that I can just, hold on to, see what happens over the next, obviously, I think when we get into August, it'll be a catalyst that the traders are going to want to have, because they're going to see it as a de-risk trade. If the data is coming out in early September, they're not going to be apt to say, "Oh, I'm going to hold it into October and through September." Most of the time, traders will say, "I'll hold it up till the end of August, and then lock in profit there." So it's a good strategy, especially for traders, active or non-active traders, because you just see how it goes. So that's Connect Bio. Let's move on to the next one. It's VTGN, which I've talked about several times before. And it seems like, obviously the cat's out of the bag. When VTGN themselves, they highlighted during their presentation to one of the firms, I believe it was RBC, but the CEO said if Palisade 4 hits, they will go with the traditional 2-trial FDA application. But if Palisade 4 is a miss, they still have one pivotal trial that has shown that they're statistically significant in terms of efficacy and safety, and it gives them a chance to use that one trial approach with their Palisades 2 trial as a foundation, backed with the useful data from all 4 of the other trials as well, that are open label, to show that that they have the data that they need to get over the finish line with that one pivotal study. So I had that. I had the stock when it was in the high 40s, but I shed it when it got to the mid 60s, because we are close to data. Data is imminent right now for VTGN and the Palisade 2. Now, here's my expectation. My expectation is, because we already know that they have one successful study, the Palisade 4 is icing on the cake. If they hit that, then it's 2 pivotal study. But if they don't, VTGN isn't. If their stock gets hit hard, I'm going to go in and load the boat, because I'm going to say to myself, they already have one pivotal study that showed statistical significance in primary and secondary. There's no reason why this should be getting hit the way it is, if indeed the Palisade 4 doesn't hit on the primary and secondary. So we know Palisade 2 did. That's a big, huge boon for stock traders. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to PRQR. And I really like PRQR. Obviously, they've got data that's going to be upcoming here shortly. It's supposed to occur in the second quarter. It's their first clinical data set from the ALDX platform. And they're going to be reading out target engagement data from their AX 0810 program in healthy volunteers in the second quarter. And the initial readout for the Axiomer program in humans will include a look at serum bile acids, which management expecting roughly a double of total serum bile acids upon treatment. The second one is conjugated bile acid ratio. The third thing is the TUDCA challenge, where a specific trackable bile acid is going to be introduced orally, so clearance from circulation can be measured. So there's 3 points that that the FDA is going to look at. It's an open label study, and I think it's going to be positive. I was looking at some analyst notes where they're giving it $8 and $10 price targets. Raymond James has an $8 price target on it, and they talk about this just being a game changer. In biliary atresia, this 08 this 0810 drug was selected as biliary atresia was selected as the lead indication for PRQR's first clinical RNA editing program, which is significant because a lot of RNA drugs are all the rage right now in terms of, what do we need to do to get this drug across the finish line, or this mechanism of action of drug with this RNA. So, with this RNA-based therapy. So, yeah, PRQR, I like, and I don't own a share. I don't own a position right now, and I'm just kind of watching it. Same with, like I said, with VTGN. I really don't have a position, but I may get one over the next few days. Since it is an open label study, I've had a chance to look at some additional notes. And again, you guys know how I am. I like open label because I like that they're able to take a look at the treatment group as well as the blinded, in terms of knowing who's on what drug and who isn't. And that a lot of times has worked well for me, and so that's why I like PRQR. Let's look at CLYM. CLYM is CLYM Bio. They've got data in June, and that's going to be significant. They're talking. They covered during their R&D day healthy volunteer B cell depletion via subcutaneous budoprutug, which is their CD20 antibody, which antibody therapy is getting more play than ever before. But they talked about how their healthy volunteer B cell depletion via subcutaneous budoprutug was similar to the IV formulation, which absolutely supports the initiation of a multi-dose study in autoimmune patients. And so, they've got their initial budo ITP data anticipated in June. They've got initial safety data from the CLYM 166 that are expected in June, with their PK and PD data expected in mid-2026. And then they've also got initial budo data from PMN and SLE trials that are anticipated in fourth quarter of 2026. So, they've got $147 million in cash. They raised an additional $110 million after the close of the quarter from a private placement where they had huge investors in there. And huge in terms of like ADAR Capital Management, Icarian, really big biotech fund managers that have done extremely well, Affinity Advisors. So I don't own a position. They've got data coming up in June, and I'm in some of the other places I talked about, ones with specific PDUFA catalyst dates. But I like CLYM. Again, active story, a lot of catalysts, and they're going to be catalysts I'm going to be following throughout the year, especially as I as some of these catalysts draw to an end, and I end up selling them and then having cash to figure out what I'm going to put my money into next. So look at Mankind. The next one I want to talk about is Mankind. And, they just got their SNDA approved in May. And then they've got a PDUFA date that is going to be on the 29th of July. And so I think that's going to bode well for them. They reported in the first quarter, which they talked about their partner United Therapeutics and how United Therapeutics brought a balance of updates because their product line working with theirs. And but Furosix is the drug that is the drug device combo that we're looking at for July. So I think there's a high probability that gets approved. That's one I'm definitely going to be owning into the PDUFA date, but not through the PDUFA date. So when I say into the PDUFA, that means like right up to before the news is released. I'm not playing through the PDUFA because I don't want to hold the stock if I'm not sure about what's going on with manufacturing. And unless I get like UNCY, like I was able to get more clarity from a recent report where, you know, Oppenheimer was able to, validate that, extra batches were being made, that there was a facility that was, active, a second facility to help with the first facility for the demand that's needed. So, Mankind is one that I've got on my watch list. I don't own shares right now, but I still like Mankind. Let's look at Guts. Guts is one we've been following for a while. They've got data in September, and that's the data that everyone's waiting on. It's actually early October, so it's not September. It's early October. It's fourth quarter, 2026, where based on their OLE and their midpoint data, they project favorable 6-month efficacy data in the fourth quarter of 26, which will be in October timeframe. So keep an eye on that. That's their big data that they have in obesity that is going to be significant. And you know, um, you know, everyone's talked about it. They believe that Fractal's transformative approaches for long-term remission of obesity and type 2 diabetes support the company's potential to become a game changer and a key player in the metabolic space. And so, there's a lot of bullishness, views, um, around the story, and they support their first-in-class potential to preserve weight loss and GLP-1 discontinuation using a non-chronic strategy. And so, you know, I see a lot of people buying into that one. Recently, about a week and a half ago, the CEO and CFO bought a bunch of shares in the company. I think 25,000 shares apiece at 85 cents. So stock was in the 70s and it spiked higher. But I think that it pretty much shows that what the management believes for Fractal Health. And we've traded it many times. I've talked about it many times. But again, as John said, it's the gift that keeps on giving with some of these stocks where you have the opportunity to trade them, get out of them, analyze and look at the story, and then go back at it again. And with data being in early October, it gives you the opportunity to get in on a stock currently under $1 that has massive potential in the GLP-1 space. So got like 3 or 4 more. Let's look at OSTX. They're looking to get accepted to accelerated approval, and they're also looking to get this rare pediatric voucher that that they're working on. And so, what they've shown recently is that they achieved global regulatory alignment on the design of their phase 3 trial for OST HER2 in fully resected pulmonary metastatic osteocarcinoma, which there's no therapy for. So, what have they done? They commenced the phase 3 prior to the BLA grant on accelerated approval in the U.S. and the MAA in the U.K., Europe, and Australia. They also got a patent pending pharmacodynamic response biomarker that was accepted by the FDA as a surrogate clinical efficacy endpoint. That allows them to potentially hit and reach their studies a lot sooner, their clinical success for their study a lot sooner. And it's a good opportunity. It's one that I've been watching. I owned it for a long time, and when it popped to the mid 80s, I took profit from 50 cents. And so I think there's a lot going on there with that company. They also have they have a MIB conference. It's an osteosarcoma conference. It's going to be in Ohio on the 25th to the 27th. They're expected to give updated news, which is great. because they've already shown 2.5 years of overall survival and with OST and osteosarcoma. So that's one to watch. Definitely one to watch. LRMR, top line open label data to support the BLA submission is expected in Q2. And I expect that data is going to be positive. That's also open label data. And that's LRMR. It's owned by a lot of smart funds. It's a drug at what is it? A taxi. I just lost the train of thought there, but I like that stock. I really do. A lot of big players in it. ADAR Capital Management, Affinity, Opali. I mean, there's good stuff in there. GOSS. We talk about the one study. Let's look at GOSS and the totality of data. Well, the FDA said that they're willing to meet with them. And, they have a meeting with the FDA in mid-June, which I believe already had. The minutes of the meeting are going to be shared in August of 2026 when they have their, meeting with the FDA. So obviously they just had their meeting with the FDA, but they're going to take 30 days to update. And so they'll have notes in their hand in July, but they won't share them with their shareholders until the meeting in August. And so I think any positive news comes out of that, the stock's going to fly. It's actually 60 cents right now, or excuse me, 16 cents right now. So, I like that. I really like that. The meeting with the FDA gives them an important incremental takeaway that I think was a shift from previous contemplated Type C meeting to pre-NDA Type B meeting as a go-for-it recommendation from the external regulatory advisors after reviewing the totality of the data set. So when the FDA tells you to go for it and moves you from a Type C to a Type B, that's significant. So, I'm going to play it. I don't have shares now, but over the next few days I'll get shares, and I'm going to play that into their into the meeting with management, and maybe hold a little to hear what I hear, or to see what I hear from that meeting when they gather.
Mhm.
So I think that'll be a good opportunity. Again, it's 17 cents right now. Here's what I want to point out that is extremely important. In June, 4 scheduled 13Gs hit, and one of those was Opali. So you had 4 institutions that were buying all in early June on a 16-cent stock. So
Yeah,
I think that gives
that is pretty unusual and definitely noteworthy.
right. It definitely is. And they were a 35-cent stock only a few months ago. So they've been heading around 16, trading around 16. So Gossamer is one to keep an eye on. Moving forward, MREO is meeting with the FDA in the third quarter. No specific timeline as far as date on the totality of data and osteogenesis imperfecta. So that's important. And then there's going to be discussions with the regulator. So that's the first thing. And Rare. So here's the thing: their partner is Rare, ticker symbol RARE, which is a mid-tier to big biopharma and Rare, has an invested interest in this drug, this UX143 for osteogenesis imperfecta. So they stated there's going to be there's discussions occurring with regulators. There's going to be information on the pathway later in the year before their Angelman data in the last half of 2026. But the goal for the FDA is to try to find a way with existing patients and ongoing treatment to come up with a path to filing, because they believe that the drug is actively working. So again, that goes to the totality of data. And then finally, TLX, they did a PDUFA, resubmitted PDUFA. They've got FDA accepted their resubmitted NDA for TLX 101 for PET imaging of glioma, and they set a PDUFA date of September 11th. So, and then you've got data for CHRS, which is $1.65, which they're going to have a readout this summer for Tagmo alongside class-wide anti-CCR8 updates, and Casdozo expected mid-year updates through the year in 2026. So, and Tagmo's near-term updates for EAC and head and neck squamous cell carcinoma in mid-2026 could facilitate transition to pivotal trials if positive, while Casdozo's first-line HCC data, could build upon previous proof of concept for its only in-class anti interleukin 27 mechanism. So, right now the shares are trading at an attractive price. Oppenheimer rates it an overperform or an outperform at the $10 price target. That's CHRS. So keep that in mind. And then finally, BFRI I've got on radar. BFRI is Biofrontera. They have a PDUFA date on September 28th. It's an SNDA, which I love SNDAs because the drug's already approved, but it's a supplemental new drug application for Ameluz, a topical gel used in combination with Rotoled red light lamp series for the treatment of basal cell carcinoma. So the FDA identified no filing deficiencies and assigned a PDUFA target date of September 28th. So is it a little ahead of the curve? Yeah, but when you think about it, these PDUFA plays, especially when they're low market cap and they're low cost, they come at you real quick, and you want to make sure that you're ahead of it because it's $1 right now. I think the 52-week low is 83 or 84 cents. That would go for me too because I'm not in the stock currently, but I do have it on my watch list. I'm watching it closely. And then I do want to say this: it's been interesting to see a couple of these PDUFA plays that I was able to call out because I knew they weren't going to get approved because of manufacturing issues, but they actually went up when their drug was rejected, as opposed to just getting hammered. And that would be ACHV, which, just got a CRL for manufacturing there. They have a patch for smoking cessation. And then CING, CING, which recently had a CRL for manufacturing as well. But I'm going to keep an eye on those, but I don't own them currently. And that's pretty much it.
Well, that's great, Jeff. Thank you so much for all of that information. As always, I thought there was a couple interesting things. We've called this out before, but obviously, that does happen, right? Where we've, a company has issued a CRL and the stock actually moves in the opposite direction than you would think, right? That happens a ton. We see it on the other end where it gets approved and the stock goes down, right? Or it goes down on positive data, right? So there are other variables to keep in mind. So that's definitely something that's worth noting. And why this is, so complex and not quite as binary as it might seem in certain cases. And then also I did think it was interesting, your mention about the open label study versus blind. I definitely think that is worth folks paying attention to and, taking a deeper look into, what type of study is being conducted within the trial. It sounds like you've had success with the open labels and, maybe that's something that other folks should be taking a look at as well.
Absolutely. They seem to be obviously they're more transparent
Right.
when the company can say, hey, we've got to look at the first 3 or 4 patients on the study and they're doing well.
Yeah.
And we're going to have upcoming data in the next 2 weeks. You're like, wow. So they're already tolerating it. So I wonder how those other 4 patients are going to get it. And it reminds me of what QNRX just did, where they gave an update on the first 4 of 6 patients and how well they were doing in their for Netherton syndrome. So,
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. That was awesome as always. Really interesting to see again, even though a lot of times there's the whole sell in May and go away and the summer months are slow. We've obviously noticed that isn't the case with biotech, and you always do have catalysts to watch out for, which is what makes it so exciting. It is a year-round thing, right? Obviously there's more catalysts surrounding medical conferences, things that we see in the fall. Obviously, we're just done with ASCO, so there's a little bit of a lull, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing being reported, and certainly a lot. You just showed there's a ton coming up, so a lot for folks to be excited about.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, we really appreciate the time, Chef, as always. We will be back on next month to talk more. As always, for folks listening and viewing us on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and also comment. We do answer the comments, as you can see, and Chef will come in and answer as well. So we appreciate the engagement and everyone listening, and hope everyone has a great month until we speak again next month.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.
Here,
Thank
guys.
you so much.
All right.